So in this video, we're going to talk about the box model. Again, the box model. Now, let's say we have a div on our page, just a basic element. And so the question becomes, from the browser's point of view, how wide is it really? And so let's just let's do an example here. Okay. So basically, in summary, before we look at an example, you have, if I set the height and the width, then it's, let's say it's 100 by 100, 100 pixels by 100, okay? All right. And then let's say I have some text in here with the content, right? Like maybe 15 lines of text. If I give it padding, okay, if I give it some padding so that the text comes in, let's say 30 pixels, it comes in from the edge of the box, then the box expands out to here. Okay, so it gets a little larger, even though the height and the width has been set. If I give it 20 pixels of padding, then there'll be 20 pixels over here and 20 pixels over here. So the total would then be, so if we have a box that is, you know, a basic div tag, right? We have our basic div tag. And let's say I give this sucker a height of 100 and a width of 100, and then I give it padding of 20. And if I just say padding without delineating padding left, padding bottom, whatever, it's going to go across the board. And let's say I give 20 pixels of padding. Then it's going to add 20 here, add 20 here, and so it'll have 140. Now let's say I also want to have a border, okay? And you know, remember our borders from the previous videos, you'll see that we can make our border 1 pixel, 10 pixels, 88 pixels, 300 pixels. Now that will also add on to the total size of our div. Let's say I gave it a border of 2 pixels. Okay, I give it a border of 2 pixels. So that's going to give it a border over here and over here. So now it's no longer 140. It's now 144 because we have 2 on the left and 2 on the right. And our padding, we had 2 on the left and 2 on the right. So it's 144 pixels wide. All right. Now this can cause us some problem. Oh, and also we've got margin. So if I had a margin, and remember, margin sets an element off from other elements. It's not internal to it. And so margin, let's say I gave it a margin of 10. Okay, 10 times 2 is 20. So then our final width would be 164. And a lot of times we need to calculate, we want to do things. Here I gave this a width of 100, right? Because I want it to stay with the browser window. I want it smack up against the side there, right? Now, where we run into a problem is, let's say let's come down here, and for this example I'm going to put in 2 break tags so that it will jump down 2 lines, 1 line, 2 line. And let's play around with some boxes here, and you'll see what I mean. All right, so I have a div. Here's my, all right, I'm going to have another. Now let's assume I want this first div to take up 70% of the browser window. Our banner, if you remember from a couple videos, maybe 2 or 3 videos ago, or last video, it was 100 pixels, or when we said it, it was 2 videos ago. No. It was 100% of the browser window. So now let's say we have two div tags. We want one to be 70% and the other 30%, because maybe the topic that we discuss in the first div is a little more important, so we give it 70%. Well, when you have padding and you have margins, this can create problems, but there's a way to fix it. Okay, so we're going to give this one an ID. We'll call it first for the first box, and we're going to give this an ID of second for the second box. Okay, and well, let's do this. We can get rid of all these. Now remember again, to fit our elements up snug against the edge of the browser window, I set the body with the margin of 0. So okay. So we have first box, that's our first box, and here's our second box. Now, you know, there are a few properties that are going to apply to both of them. So I'm going to create a class called a box. And so this is uniquely identified with an ID first, but we'll give it a class of a box. Okay, notice we have, okay, whoopsie, class a box. And we want these boxes, eventually we're going to want them to sit on the same line with each other, so we're going to give them inline block. So remember, inline block, it will respect the size properties of each div tag, of each element. It doesn't have to be a div tag, right? It could apply to other elements. But we want them to be able to sit in line, in the same line with each other. Okay, so to set these things off from each other, I'm going to give this a background color of aquamarine. I'm going to give this a background color of just aqua. Wait a minute, that's not right. There we go, slightly different. And what are we going to do here? Oh, well, we want this, the first one, width 70%, and we want this one width 30%, and okay. Oh, well, let's do this. Let's put in here so we can, it needs some content, right? It needs some content. Otherwise, if I don't give it a height, you won't even see it, right? You won't even see this box if I don't give it a height. If I don't put that in there, let's see what happens. You don't even see it, right? But if were I to do this, and were I to do this, okay, now you see it. Okay, so this one's taking up 70%, this one's taking up 30%. And here we have, remember, our break tags, break tag 1, break tag 2. So we have 1 line, 2 line. It's an easy way just to drop things down a few lines is to use those break tags. All right, great. It looks like it's doing what we want, right? Okay, so here's our first box. Here's our second one. But now, how large is this? All right, so we don't have any padding. We don't have a border. We don't have margins. We just have a little bit of content. And the width, no height is assigned. No height has been assigned. It will, as I put in more text, if I put in a ton of text, the height will just automatically adjust itself, right? But the width is set to the first one 70, the next one 30. And so that's a total of 100%, right? Now, let's add some padding and see what happens. So maybe I think that I want the text to move in just a little. Let's give it a padding. Well, let's give it padding all around of 5 pixels. Okay. Uh-oh. So here I have 5 pixels over here. I have 5 pixels above it, 5 pixels below it. And it bumps this one down to the next line. And the reason is because padding adds to the final size of an element. That padding now increased it. It's not just 70%. It's 70% plus 5 pixels. And so actually plus 10 pixels because it's on both sides, right? Now, so this is a bit of a problem, but how can you fix it? Well, there is a property that we can use, and it is called box sizing. And we have 3 choices. We have content box. We have content box, which is that's the standard, okay? And we have padding box and border box, but we don't really need to worry about padding box. We'll just use border box, because border box includes not only the border, but also the padding. Okay, so if we use border box, essentially what it says is, hey, no matter what, Mr. Browser, if I've set it to 70%, even if I've got padding, don't let it go beyond 70% and just adjust things internally. So it will squish things down further, okay, inside of our element first. Under no circumstances will it let it go out beyond 70%. So as a result of that, we can remain on the same line. But you see, this one has the padding there. I mean, to make it look good, we ought to just give this padding of 5 pixels, and we will also give this box sizing border box. So this one also will do the same for our border. So our border also, all right, remember our padding adds to the size of the final element, how it's calculated from the browser's perspective, as well as the border. Okay, so in a minute we'll do that, but let's just take a look and see what happens now. Okay, now we're back to normal, or at least we're back to where we want to be. And somehow I wasn't thinking straight, and this should be second. But now, let's say we put border 1 pixel dashed black, and put this here. Okay. Now what happens? Okay. So you can see that you're still able to keep these things on the same line if you want to. As I'll discuss a little bit later, sometimes let's first just get down to business. We have a problem though. What if we gave one of these a margin of 3 pixels? What's going to happen then? Boom. Nope. Doesn't include margins. Now margins, remember, margins are what separate an element from all other elements around it. So the margin specifies the distance between this and this, these two separate elements. The padding is between the content. Here we just have text, but we could have an image. The content inside of a box and the box itself. And we specified 5 pixels, as I remember. So here's the padding this way, the padding up above, the padding right here, and there's so much space over here we can't see that there is some padding of 5 pixels over here were it to expand. So you're out of luck when it comes to margins there. Get rid of it. Okay. Now, what do we have here? Let's do this. What if these things had a bunch of text in them? Okay. What if we had a bunch of text in these boxes? And what would happen? Okay. Now, what if I want that to go up here? Well, I want that thing to float upwards. So remember, this here, it's on the same line, but it's respecting the height. Now, if I want that to float up here, I could give it a float right, and sure enough, it goes up there. Now let's say that we gave this one, now we're going to give this one some text, and we say, oh, okay, so here we are there. Now, you might notice that, those dashed lines are combining. Well, we can fix that. We can go over to the one, we'll go over to the one which, well, let's see here. Let's just do this. You'll see. It's simple enough. Border right, none. Now, look closely there. Okay, now it's back to normal. Okay, so now one thing you will find that as your layouts get more complex, and let's say we have another line down here and one up here, and we're floating something down here, we're floating something up there, you may end up deciding that, wow, this can get pretty tricky. I mean, no matter how good you are at it, because if you have maybe 7 or 8 different elements, maybe an image in here floating, another line down here, something up two or three different elements above this one, and one is floating right, and maybe another is floating left, you have to clear this float and clear that float, you may discover that, wow, when this really gets tricky is when you come back to a web page you've created maybe a year ago, or maybe even 3 months ago, and you need to modify it for a client, and you discover, there's a lot of moving parts. This is really tricky. Well, that's why sometimes it's better just to make your layouts really simple. Maybe what you could do is just go ahead and create one line here. Do something like this. Here, where are our things here? Here's our second. Here's this one. Maybe what you could do is set these things on. Well, let's just set it off here. You could make this one go 100 and You could get rid of that. Give this a padding of maybe 65. You could, and you could start to adjust things. You could give this text a font. Maybe what you could do, you can also do is put a text box right in, put a text box in this part, and then position it absolutely, and then put a text box over here and position it absolutely. And then what happens is, if you get to, you will see in some of my later videos, I'm going to discuss how to make these designs really responsive. It's called responsive design, and that is where these different elements will change based on the browser width. And the way we do that is we use what are called media queries. Again, media queries. And those, essentially, they lock into or query information about the device and the browser width that is accessing a particular page. And then our code internally changes. And as well as our CSS properties will change based on that. And it sounds complex, but it's not. It sounds like it's kind of complex, but believe me, it's not. And so what you could do is lay these things out in a much more simple way, and then later on they'll be easier to modify. And then, for example, instead of having different floats and trying to use floats to position these things, maybe sometimes what you want to do is just have two boxes and then position them absolutely, style them up, and then with your media queries, you can go in and say, all right, once the browser gets to, say, tablet size, 768 pixels, then adjust the size of the two boxes. I'm assuming you've got two boxes in here positioned absolutely. Adjust the size of those and adjust where exactly they are. And then when you get to down here where you're like phone size, right? Under 450 pixels, you're looking at phones, right? You can just say, all right, at that point, you can clear one element out completely. You can set the display to none, and it will just disappear. And then what you do is you'll have another thing up here. And so I guess the idea is you don't want to make these layouts too complex. I mean, just because you can do it, just because it could be done one way, using floats and putting two or three div tags on the same line, that's not always the best way to go. I really don't. So just remember that. You'll see a lot of it out there. You'll see a lot of different ways. There are many different ways to skin a cat. I know if your English isn't, if you're not a native English speaker, we have a saying is there are many ways to skin a cat, and that just means there are very many ways to do things. There's more than one way to skin a cat. I think it's probably best to use a simple way, so that when you come back to it later, you can remember, whoa, I'm floating this image bumps down, whoa. So you just want to bear that in mind.